Loud and clear?
Yes, we can.
Thanks very much. And this is yet another gecko towards the tail end of the year. I think there's 2 more to go. And this one is on endoscopy, and a subject close to my heart. But let me say a few thank yous. This is part of the bigger ECHO program from New Mexico, and it's hosted for us via their India hub. And we're entirely grateful for the privilege of having this platform to use for our sub-Saharan initiatives in gastroenterology. We are represented by no fewer than 12 countries from sub-Saharan Africa. That includes the Cameroon, Congo, Kenya, Mozambique, Sudan, Tanzania, Zambia and Zimbabwe, which are obviously the 2 Zs, and ourselves, UK and USA, are also listening in for one reason or another. And we're very grateful to the whole platform, which we hope will grow a little bit as we move through the talks. Before I start, this is a subject which is very close to my heart, because I did spend some time trying to get reasonable at the procedure. And so I'd like just to, as a means of a very short introduction, just share some slides with you that I have that I think are pertinent to what's coming up from 2 very talented and driven individuals in gastroenterology who have been successful and will share their story in a minute. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Can you see the share screen, or can you see the actual screen?
Okay, now you're in slide mode.
Okay. That better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So just to remind you, for those of you who don't know too much about South Africa, we're about 60 million, probably nearer 65. And before I moved to Cape Town, I lived and worked in Durban, which is a major town here with a peri-urban population of about 4 million. It had one ERCP service for the whole of the province, which was about 10 million. And that was the sort of situation when I was practicing in gastroenterology there. And this is a slightly map of actual KwaZulu-Natal as it now is, and you can see it outlined in red there. And I was in Durban, and we chose to try to set up ERP service in Peter, and up here, very close to Richards Bay. And I'll tell you, I just want to show you one picture of that endeavor, because it contains a Nigerian on the right-hand side who was the individual who drove the process in Pietermaritzburg. And this was now approximately 18 years ago when we first set it up, and I'm to say that it's still thriving. I didn't know anything about modern principles. I just knew that they needed to have a service, and we used the neurosurgical radiology equipment, which was pretty awkward to get around, but pretty good to see what you were doing. So I'm just going to unshare my little task here, and I'm going to see how you can really do it properly. We would like to introduce now Akwi Asabang, who has, shall we say, from Zambia, educated in India, as at least at MBBS level. I think because her father was moving around in political service or national service or world gastroenterology service, I'm sure she'll fill us in. She ended up in quite a few places and ended up having her medical education in the US. And she's never forgotten her roots ever since then. and is now gone through gastroenterology, interventional gastroenterology fellowships in Harvard, and is now at the Mass General. And she's also head of their global gastroenterology outreach. And I've been interacting with her over the past year and been absolutely amazed by what she's achieved, can achieve, and persuades others to do for her, including me. And we're working on some collaborative projects as we speak. But she's going to tell us the story of how she got involved in trying to set up a service, and we'll see just how that has occurred. So Akwi, if you can share your slides with us, and it's over to you to introduce the first part of the session. Thank you. You need to unmute as well, Akwi.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and I will let me put up my slides here. Can you see my screen yet?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Hold on 1 second. Share, and here we go. All right. Can you see my screen now?
That's good.
I'll put it in presenter mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get started. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers. I'm absolutely honored to be here today. I think the highlight for me was I actually got to see Cheryl and Karen. I thought these were bots in the background, but today I actually got to meet them. They're the ones who are behind the scenes sending us the email. So that's been the highlight for me today. I look forward to a very robust conversation with everyone today. I have no disclosures. And in terms of the outline, so I will give the perspective from the US side, and then Professor Alatisha will explain from the Nigerian side. And then I'll come back on and give a very brief summary of what we have planned and possibly how people could get involved. And so the things that we'll touch on, sort of highlight on the pre-op, the preparation, the intra-op, things that we think about on the days of the procedure, and then the post-op, things we think about after the procedure, after leaving the site when the week is done. So starting with a bit of background, and some of you may have seen this, but to those who are seeing this for the first time, I just think it's important for us to define what global health means. And so by definition, it's an area of study for research and practice that places a priority on improving health and equity in all for all people around the world. And so there's an emphasis on transnational issues, determinants, and solutions. It involves many disciplines within and beyond the health services. So it's not only about medicine, but there's a component of law, economics, history, engineering. And we think about that as we're developing our GI programs. It's not only about the GI doctor, but it's also about the other services involved in developing the program. Global health also promotes interdisciplinary collaboration. So we have to reach across and work with other individuals. Even though when we plan programs, we're thinking sort of on a population level, but when we're performing the procedures, it's on an individual level. And I always want to highlight, that global health is not a vacation. I think those who don't understand the concept of traveling to different countries and working, they may think that you're going on vacation when it truly isn't, and you'll have a chance to see what it is that I'm referring to. So let's very briefly, and I think I have 1 or 2 slides dedicated to this, let's talk about the state of GI within our African continent. So what we know is that there are limited gastroenterology training programs in Africa. There are few gastroenterology endoscopy centers with adequate resources. And some of the identified barriers to endoscopy services are the shortage of endoscopists who have actually undergone advanced endoscopic training, a lack of equipment, and basic infrastructure. And things we need to think about when developing endoscopy services are, what are the local prevalence of diseases, and what is the availability of resources as you're developing these programs? So when we talk about a global health, when we talk about gastroenterology global health programs, things we need to consider when developing the program is the clinical aspect, so the didactics and the hands-on endoscopy training, the research component, the mentorship, partnerships and collaborations. And in that, we have to think about providing both educational and training resources. We have to think about developing exchange programs. So making it bi-directional. So meaning as I travel to whichever country, and in this case, Nigeria, I should also work towards giving opportunities for my colleagues to travel to the US or wherever it is that I'm based. And also as we're developing these programs, we have to think of local capacity building. As I say, it's not a one-off. You don't come, it's not a hit and run mission. You don't come, you do, and you're done. But we need long-term sustainability, long-term partnerships. So what's the goal of ERCP training? So some of the things that we need to think about for the endoscopist is we need to emphasize objective measures over case volume. So it's not necessarily the total number of cases you've done, but also what are the benchmarks that we're trying to achieve? So some of the accepted benchmarks would include cannulation rates. And the concept of number of procedures needed, there's some data to suggest that you would need about 200 ERCPs before you're deemed competent in performing an ERCP independently. But it's also important to know that competency is not determined simply by the number of cases, but by objective criteria and direct observation. And the other things you need to incorporate as you're developing a program is the logbook for records. So you need to document the cannulation rates, you need to document sphincterotomy, stent placements, and even tissue sampling. I know here in the States, when applying for a job, they actually ask for your logbook. They want to see how many cases you've done, described as noted here on this on the slide. So let's focus on Nigeria and sort of how my story started in Nigeria. So, background population in Nigeria, over 200 million, about 110 endoscopists, only 2 performed ERCPs. And to perform ERCPs, that was 100 cases over 15 years. But right now we have the dedicated ERCPs being performed in IFAM, sorry. So my first visit was in 2017 when I traveled there as a faculty. I was sponsored by the ASGE, the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. And I think this is important as the audience is watching when you thinking of opportunities for funding. So they supported my trip. And the way that worked was actually Dr. Deji Ajayi applied for funding and he supported that. And that I had an opportunity to meet some fantastic people. I'm only highlighting a handful of them, but I met a lot of people who I'm still in touch with today. So in this first picture, that's Professor Ajayi. And then as you can see, I also had the chance to meet Professor Alatishe and Dr. Oyeleki. And the first, when I met Dr. Alatishe there, we talked about his interest in developing ERCP program. And we actually started the official communications about 3 months later. And he was very, very determined. And that's what drove me there. He was very determined in getting the program going for the community. And so things we thought we discussed and thought about is the interest to collaborate, which is from Professor Alatishe. And then from my perspective, I needed to understand what the resources were in country for us to be able to move forward. And so these are some of the questions that one needs to ask before they get started. So when it comes to personnel, what is the administrative support, the institutional support? In other words, growth and sustainability and capacity. This is important. If you have the admin that's supporting you, these are things that can occur and last long term. Who is it that we're training and why are we training? And that's a conversation him and I had, because the key was this had to be a team approach. So who are the doctors being trained? Endoscopists, gastroenterologists, the surgeons, anesthesiologists, radiologists, pathologists. The nurses have to be included in that training. Who are the other trainees? The residents, the surgeons, the GI fellows, the radiographers, technicians, and the biomedical engineers. And the other question we asked beforehand is, what's the experience of the endoscopist? So the endoscopist has to be competent in upper endoscopy before you can proceed with being competent in ERCP. Then we also needed to discuss, we discussed pharma support, the medical device companies, because that's extremely important as well. Then the other question that came up beforehand, and these are questions we discussed or addressed even before I physically went there. What is the facility? It's at a hospital. So that was another integral component. I need to just pause really quick because I'm having some issues and I might need you to share. I'm just gonna pause my slides, okay?
Okay.
I'm having, it's a bit weak here. So I'm just gonna stop sharing for a second. Are you able to share my slides?
Yeah, I've got it here. What
Okay.
slide? I just didn't know the slide number you were on.
If you could just put it up and I can scroll through because it's looking like it's a little bit weak.
Are we over there? Yeah. This is where you stop. Can you see this?
I can't
Pre-op
see.
planning.
If you can share it and then, so I don't know what just happened here.
Okay, give me a sec.
Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Do you have it yet? If not, I can
Yeah,
check
I
in my
do.
email.
No.
I'm
just
sorry.
No, that's fine. Okay, let me just close this as well. Okay, here we go.
Yes. So if you can just go back one and just go back one.
Okay, that's a
Okay.
personal one. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we can, so the facility, the question we asked is where is this being done? And it's being done in the hospital. In terms of supplies, these are things we need to think about. The accessories being used for the procedures and the availability of contrast, which I count under supplies. Then the other thing we needed to think about in terms of the pre-op planning is the medical licensure and malpractice coverage. These are things that we actually discussed before I got there. Next slide, please. And so part of the pre-op planning equipment. So the questions are, do you have the duodenoscope? Do you have the processor? Do you have the tower, the monitor? Who does the handling and the cleaning? And in terms of the fluoroscopy, do you have a C-arm or fixed unit? In terms of the lead room, is the room we're using actually leaded? And is the bed that's going to be utilized for the procedure a lead bed? In radiation exposure, do you have the protective equipment to perform the procedure? In terms of repairs, what happens when the scope, scope breaks down? What is our next step? And in terms of accessories, I put this in parentheses because I'll show you some of the accessories that are needed for the procedure, because sometimes people may not necessarily understand when we say accessories. And in terms of patient logistics, we actually discussed this beforehand in terms of admitting the patient, obtaining pre-op labs before the actual procedure. Next slide, please. And so what I just wanted to show here, for those who may have not necessarily seen what the Ercp scope looks like, the key thing I wanted to show on this is how it differs from the forward viewing scope, because the Ercp scope, the duodenoscope, is a side viewing scope. And this is extremely important when it comes to handling and cleaning the scope. Next slide, please. And then when I was talking about whether it's a C-arm or a fixed unit, this is what it looks like. The image below shows what the differences are between a C-arm and a fixed unit. Next. And then when it comes to protective gear, this is what I'm referring to, whether you've got the lead suit, whether it's a skirt on the top, you have the thyroid shield, and you have the eye goggles. Eye goggles are not mandatory, but this is what I'm referring to when we talk about the radiation exposure protection gear. Next slide, please. And so intra-procedural things we talk about next, we talk about the room setup and we talk about the patient position. Next, please. And so what we're looking at is the patient positioned adequately. Is your room set up adequately? Next slide, please, or next slide. And so when we talk about patient position, they could either be supine, prone, or left lateral. So you have to be able to perform the procedure in all of these three different positions. Next slide. And so post-op planning, post-procedure, what is it that we're going to do? So we discuss patient monitoring. Immediately after the procedure and the day after the procedure, are they able to monitor complications? Can the team identify complications? And then we would debrief. That was part of the plan. We have to debrief and get patient updates. How did the patient do after the procedure? At the end of the week, we would review the list of supplies, and I actually left all the supplies behind, and would keep track of what we had and what we needed so that for the next time we were able to supplement what was missing. Equipment handling post-procedure was also important. Next slide, please. And this had to do with the cleaning of the scopes. And so now when we talk about accessories, and we're going to go through this really, really fast, but the reason I wanted to show this slide is that, you know, I wanted the audience to understand setting up an ERCP is not only about the quote unquote, the machine, the scope, but the accessories are equally as important. So do you have the electrosurgical generator? Do you have the foot pedal? Next slide, please. Which is needed for sphincterotomy. Do you actually have the tones? And there's different companies that can provide the tones, whether it's Boston Scientific or Cook. There's multiple companies that provide the tones. Next slide. And then do you have the different wires? And there are different types of cannulation wires available. Next slide, please. What's a straight or an angled wire, but you need to have those different options. Do you have the balloons needed for extraction, or do you have the balloons needed for dilation? Next slide, please. Do you have the contrast media? Do you have the baskets? Do you have the stents? Next slide, please. And then in terms of stents, the things we think about, do you have the plastic stent or a metal stent that's needed for the procedure? And if it's a metal stent, do you have a variety of uncovered versus covered stents? Next slide, please. And then this is just sort of a summary to show some of the accessories needed. And I really want to emphasize, as we're setting this up, these are things we need to think about. It's not only the machine, but it's also the accessories. Next slide. And so these are some of the companies out there that provide these supplies. I just listed some, there are probably a lot more, but these are the more common companies. Next slide. All right, so pre-programming. So then now it's time for me to make that trip. What are some of the things that I have to think about from my end? So do I have institutional support to be able to travel? So when I was at Brown and now at MGH, I do. And so things is, as part of my planning, I needed to have dedicated time, and this was incorporated into my work schedule. So when I travel to Nigeria, I am still considered as working, and it's not a vacation. So the time I take off is my work time. Then things that you would need to think about is also the cost of the visa, location of the embassy, travel and accommodation. So for me, I was in Boston, and so I'd have to fly out to New York to be able to get a visa. And so either I'll take a bus or the train or actually fly out. And it would take, it's about 220 miles, about an hour flight. And the other things that I would think about, or anyone else there who's thinking about this, is long-term. If I am in the States, what kind of partnership do I want? Is this going to be sort of what I call the 10 to the 8 or the 6-6, meaning am I going to spend 10 months in the US, 2 months in Nigeria, spread out through the year? Or is it 8 months and 4 months, or 6 and 6? And then it's always important to involve family expectations, so you don't just bring this up to your partner. So this is something that's known early on, that you're taking time off for work and not just sort of making these random trips to Nigeria or whatever country you decide to go to. Next slide, please. And so other things involved in the pre-program is the travel team. Who am I going to travel with? So the first time I traveled to Nigeria, I traveled with a tech, Mr. Jermaine Brissett. And then the things I thought about are the supplies that I was bringing in. So I actually brought my own lead. So as an individual, you can purchase your own lead through the hospital. It's about $1,500 to $2,000 for you to get your full lead gear. So I brought my own. I also brought accessories that were donated or that we obtained through grants. At the airport, a few things that were important is I had a letter with a list of items. This was for customs. And then I put a copy of the letter in the suitcase, and I put a sample of that, you know, on the screen. I basically told them after they finished examining, they needed to lock my suitcase up. And then the lead, this is another important thing, you know, as part of my pre-program planning. I carried my lead with me as hand luggage when going to Nigeria, but upon return, I was able to check it in as checked luggage. And so generally how it would work is I'd leave the States on a Friday, arrive in Nigeria on a Saturday. I was well taken care of by the Nigerian team. They would pick me up from the airport, we'll drive to Ife, and then on Sunday we'll have a multidisciplinary meeting. And this involved the surgeons, residents, radiologists, anesthesiologists, nurses, and radiographers. So basically everyone would meet. We will discuss the cases for the week. We would use that as an opportunity to also, I'd have to use the word ration, whatever supplies we had, we'll basically say who's going to get what based on what we had. And when Monday came, would hit the ground running, do cases Monday through Friday, and on Friday, and head back to the airport, arrive in the States on Saturday, and then head back to work in the States on Monday. Next slide. And so our first program was in March of 2018. And this was just above and beyond what I had expected. And this was all arranged by Professor Letitia. In the morning, we had lectures, and which were introductory lectures. In the afternoon, we had hands-on sessions where we discussed about the scope, cleaning of the scope, accessories, and performed actual cases. Medical device company, we actually had JNCI present. They had a representative present with us during each of the sessions, which was extremely important. And they were the ones demonstrating how to clean the scopes in real life. Next slide. And so this is just our very brief 1-year experience. So as you would notice, people were traveling from a very long distance to come to IFE for their procedures. And the way we sent the message out, Professor Letitia would post it in our Sojin WhatsApp group and announce that, you know, this is coming, this is the date, and these are the patients we want. And what you'd notice is obviously as the doctors became more aware that this service was available, there was an increase in the number of referrals for the procedures. And so this is only a reflection of that first year, but till this date, and he'll give more details, they've performed over 400 ERCPs just in the past few years. Next slide, please. And so in 2019, as we were expanding the program and we had added more faculty, IFE was the site where the scientific meeting was taking place. Next, please. And so we had received a donation from Boston Scientific. And so I'd applied for a grant from Boston Scientific, and they donated about $30,000 worth of accessories. And I was able to travel with all of these to Nigeria. And the second picture, what you see is not only Mr. Brissett and Professor Letitia, but the other 3 faculty who were recruited to be part of the IFE endoscopy training program. Next, please. And then as part of that, when I emphasize incorporating the medical device companies and their representatives at the scientific meeting, they were actually present helping us set up in terms of setting up the equipment, because we also had endoscopic ultrasound present during that meeting for the first time. Next, please. And this is just showing part of the hands-on training. We actually gave the supplies that were donated by Boston Scientific were used and handed to the participants as part of the training program for the demo. Next, please. And so it's also important to have a bilateral exchange and mentorship. And so what I've been able to do so far is I was able to arrange for the charge nurse, Sola Debinu, to come to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which is where Mr. Germain is. And she was able to spend some time over in that endoscopy suite. And then as part of my visits to Nigeria, I've had the opportunity to meet Nurse Johnson Ogudare, who I set up for him to spend a month with me at Rhode Island Hospital and the Miriam Hospital in Providence. So I think it's extremely important, like I mentioned, the point about bilateral exchange, being able to provide opportunities for individuals to see the setup in which you're working in as well. Next. And then part of the research and mentorship, so also through my visits with Nigeria, we've actually been able to publish with Professor Letitia and the team, we've been able to present and publish our work. So we actually presented for the first time at Digestive Disease Week. We presented at AOTIC 2019, and then we published in the Nigerian Postgraduate Medical Journal about our experience in endoscopy and clinical outcomes. And in terms of mentorship, I've been mentoring one of the gastroenterologists who's also a recipient of the ACG International Training Grant, which is an opportunity for him to come and spend 6 months here in the US. So he should be coming to Brown shortly. Next slide, please. And so I'll pause now and hand things over to Professor Letitia, and then I'll come back and explain the other aspect. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Akwi. I think without further ado, we'll move on to Olusogun. He's also a very accomplished gentleman. And this is also the same institution that's got a long-standing arrangement with the Memorial Sloan Kettering through Peter Kingham, who many of us in South Africa are familiar with his efforts to support growth in gastroenterology and liver surgery on the continent. So over to you, Latis, and we're looking forward to hearing the other side of the story. We can see your slides.
Thank you. I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Professor Thompson for the invitation, and Dr. Akwe for the beautiful presentation and all the assistance you've been able to render to us. So I'll quickly run through my slides, sharing our own experience. Yeah, ERCP was first introduced in Nigeria in the 1980s. And the first publication on diagnostic ERCP was first published from my hospital in the early 90s by some of my senior colleagues. Unfortunately, after the military era, the skill was lost, and all who needs the facility either travel out of the country or offered needless surgeries. Obstructive jaundice is one of the very common case that a general surgeons will see. I'm a general surgeon, and I see a lot of it during my training in early of my, even during my clinical practice. Most general surgical units will see about 2 to 3 cases per week. And the common cause of obstructive jaundice is, as I highlighted, majority of them are actually cancers. Unfortunately, most of those patients present very late. The curative treatments is rarely performed because patients are presenting very late. Most of them, what they require is some form of palliative procedure. Up till when we establish ERCP, almost all these patients are exposed to surgical option because that's the only thing that is available for them. And the sad thing is that the surgeries were associated with high morbidity and mortality. In fact, the few that have reported their series, and which is not different from what I saw in my early practice, is that 30-day mortality operating some of those patients could be as high as 60%. That means 6 out of 10 of those patients that we operated will die of the disease. So, but there are some that we can't even operate, especially those that have hilar cholangiocarcinoma. Majority of us will just leave them to die of their disease. Some we give them chemotherapy that does not help them. Imagine giving somebody chemotherapy with bilirubin of 500 or 30 mg%, whichever one, 500 micromole or 30 mg%. You can imagine that kind of scenario. That's what we were doing for those patients. So aside from that, what gave me the impetus to want to do this is that the incidence of gallstones appear to be rising. Most Nigerian patients are aware that the minimal access surgery can be performed and it's better for them to have that type of surgery. And the patients are demanding for it. Fortunately, and unfortunately, most private and academic institutions are beginning to adopt laparoscopy surgery. I say fortunately because they are picking it up is a good thing, but expectedly, as all clients that have developed the skill, the learning curve is a little bit steep, and initial early phase of the development of the skill, the likelihood of injury is there. So we were beginning to see incident of bowel duct injury, and the injury is beginning to face us as general surgeon to fix. In those early days, all those patients were exposed to multiple surgery, and despite all those surgeries, the outcome was poor. And what pained me then was that I also saw some patients that have benign condition, has surgery for benign condition, eventually develop biliary cirrhosis. So the need to have ERCP to me in Nigeria was a passion that I couldn't afford to continue to see what I'm seeing and how I'm managing the patient. It was an emotional thing. I see it as the life or death for my patient, which something has to be done. I cannot just see myself doing the same thing the same way and expecting a better result. So that's what motivated me. I'll just share a few of my journey in my ERCP training. My first exposure to ERCP was in 2006, shortly before I finished my training as a general surgeon at Cairo Training Center in Cairo, Egypt, led by Professor Ibrahim Mustafa, which I'm sure most of his senior colleagues is aware. I had 3 weeks training there. And the second exposure, which was ERCP dedicated training, was also in Egypt at Mansoura, Egypt, at the Hepatobiliary Gastrointestinal Center in Mansoura. And that training was funded by AMAJ through the leadership of Dr. Faiz Sando. After that training, though I had hands-on training then, I attempted to start the ERCP, but the attempt, all the effort failed, because we weren't able to cannulate the first few patients that I that presented to us, because the patients were there, but the skill was what was deficient. So I had another exposure in 2015 in Johannesburg, South Africa, facilitated by Professor Martin Smith. I visited most centers where ERCP were being performed in Johannesburg. I was being ferried around by the Boston Scientific staff. They took me to most of the centers to see the differences in practice in all those centers. And that was very helpful, because that was when I know that you don't have to have a tabletop fluoroscopy machine to be able to do ERCP, which was being used in WITS, which was my primary center I visited. I spent hours in Boston Scientific Skill Lab. I was working on their wet lab, trying to perfect the skill, because essentially what I was seeing, because it was just an observership, I didn't have an hand-on. So I would watch in the morning and I would go and spend the evening, all the evening on their skill lab. When I finished this, I thought I got all what I needed to start it. When I came back and I found I couldn't cannulate the first two cases, and then I have to abandon it. But as a surgeon, I know that the best model to start any new skill set is probably to have some hands-on session to observe the procedure, have some hands-on session in the setting not too far from yours, have a well-trained individual who can launch the program with you, with the local team. And this model has been used effectively in open heart surgery, even in my hospital, in transplantation program in my hospital. Unfortunately, it was difficult to get one that would be ready. I wrote to many friends, both Nigeria and non-Nigeria in diaspora, and not seemed to be responding to my call until I met with Akui, who seemed to have been looking for such an opportunity. And it seems as if our desire meet each other. So it was a gelling of aspiration and desire. So who should you be looking for to help you to facilitate such a program? It must be a well-trained individual. It must be somebody that is very flexible, that have an idea of the culture and the environment that you find yourself, must be ready to adapt and use limited resources. It shouldn't be somebody that said, oh, it must be metal stent, and if you don't get a metal stent, I won't do the procedure. Must be somebody that is able to use and adapt and manage resources effectively. And it must be also be able to rally support from all the companies. These are all what I found in Dr. Akui. And who should the local person be? For example, if you are an international person and you are looking for somebody to work with, it must be somebody that is willing to learn, which I think I am. It must be a team leader, must be somebody that can rally every other group that you need can work with you, must be resilient and persistent, because there will be a lot of things to discourage you, and must be a person that can garner the institutional support to support the program. And must be somebody that is not only focusing on the procedure, must be an interface between the institution and the vendors that will supply all the accessory. So how did we start? Dr. Akuya said that we got a training scope that was donated for us for the training by the GSC High Group. We, like Dr. Professor Sandy said, we also used the CHAM that is being used by the neurosurgery unit. That was the CHAM that I used. We got the donated consumables from Akui, came with some, and some I got from some friend in diaspora. And we had the local team contributed money to sponsor the training. We contributed the money to carry Akui to manage all our expenses while and make her comfortable while she was with us. This good group of people that came for the first training, meeting with the CMD, we invited people in Nigeria that were interested, along with our nurses and residents. Like she said, it was a combination of didactic and hands-on training. We had a wet lab that we worked on in the morning and then in the afternoon. But what I think is also a game changer is that other trainers come on board. And one thing I have learned about ERCP is that everybody is unique. Somebody will put his own above his shoulder, another person will put it under his shoulder. Everybody seems to have his technique. And for a young trainee, you need to be exposed to everybody, every technique, because you don't know when all those things will be useful. So when she brought other team along to help us, that seemed to strengthen my confidence to be able to do this procedure. We always review the radiology of the patient before the procedure, before performing it. And I have a radiologist that worked with us, and we were able to, at some points, started to introduce EUS. This is our team. On the top right corner, left corner is our nurses. The anesthesiologists, we have dedicated anesthesiologists with us. We have a radiographer with us. This is our Leye Omishore is our radiologist that is always at the back, at just the strike of a finger, she will show up to review the imaging with us. The head of the endoscopy unit, Professor Ndububa, who was also very supportive, and the administration was also very supportive for them to come. But we are now, that started with a donated scope, but now we have 2 towers of our own. We have an Optera tower, we have an Ezra 3 tower, we have 2 duodenoscope, we have a dedicated Ercp arm, and we have a dedicated electrosurgical unit. This is what the current setup look like. We have a leaded room, we have a dedicated C-arm, we have an Ezra 3 tower that we use, and our nurses have been trained enough to be able to support and assist. This is what we do. This is our current setup now. Let me quickly mention the number of cases we performed so far. We performed 352 procedures since March 2018 that we started. The age range from 18 years to 93 years. The 8 years young for common bowel duct for stone extraction, and then the patient had laparoscopic cholecystectomy. A 93-year-old patient was the one that had CA head of pancreas with obstructive jaundice, and was referred to us because no surgeon was willing to touch the patient for a bypass. So, and we were able to stent the patient. The median age of our patient is 55. Our male to female ratio was almost like 1 to 1, as you can see on the slide. We started the program in 2018. We did about 31 cases in 2018. By 2019, the procedure, we did about 97. Of course, it was an astronomical growth, and we were poised to grow this from 97 to about 200 in 2020, but COVID struck. Everybody was aware of what the whole world went through, and most of the centers were shut down. It was difficult to continue the practice. Our visitors couldn't visit, and everything was on lockdown. But despite, because we've been able to pick the skill, we kept the procedure on, and we were able to do about 90 cases in 2020. And this year, none of our visitors have been able to visit, but we've been able to do about 128 procedures. And we are hoping that by next year, we'll be able to grow this to a greater extent. Now, majority of our cases are malignant. In fact, as if the more cases we perform, the less benign cases we see. Almost all the cases that have been referred for us are malignant condition. Majority of them with severe jaundice. They were severely jaundiced in difficult situation, in bad situation. These were patients that nobody was willing to offer any form of bypass. And we've also looked at the indication over the years, as you can see on the chart. I got this chart just 5 minutes before presenting this. And essentially, you see that the number of biliary duct injury we are seeing is rising. The number of cholelithiasis that we are seeing is reducing, and the incidence of cancers are growing right from when we started till date. So the picture, these are the fluoroscopic image that I show on the left. left-hand side was the one I took on Tuesday, where sigmoid shape sigmoid common bile duct, and that has destroyed the ampulla. You can imagine if you have the second part of the duodenum looking like this second part of the picture I showed on the right hand corner of the slide. How do you enter into the common bile duct? That is the kind of cases that we have to deal with. Of course, we review all the, we always image all our patients, and we review all the cases in a multidisciplinary setting based on our initial experience. All patients that have anemia, that have recurrent jaundice, we always offer them upper GI endoscopy before we offer them ERCP, because most of them come out to be having an obstructive tumor that will not be amenable to ERCP. All the procedures are performed under general anesthesia. If you counted all the patients that we couldn't cannulate based on the destroyed ampulla, our success rate is about 80, because we couldn't cannulate them because there's no ampulla to even put any sphincterotomy in. So the only thing we could do for some of those patients is just to do a biopsy. If we remove all those that the only thing that can be done for them is just to take a biopsy, success rates grow to 92, which I think is not too bad for a young growing center like ours. We have established a working relationship with Consumable, with Boston Scientific. We are trying to establish with others so that we can encourage competition. But it's not without some failures. We lost some patients during the periprocedure, during the procedure, immediately after the procedure, a majority of them were anesthetic issues, because this patient
Hello.
of them, I lost 2 to bleeding post-op complication. Hello? Can you hear me?
I think, Alatis, yes, I think maybe if you switch off your video, the audio may be a bit better, but I think we probably need to wind up in the next couple of slides.
All right, I will do that. All right, so we lost some patients with severe pancreatitis and a patient that eventually had acute cholangitis and liver abscess. This patient was discharged but came back to the hospital, and then we did postmortem for him and found that this is what we had. This is what the patient actually had. We had some other complications, but these ones were minor, which we managed. But what were the lessons we learned? It is possible to do it. Most of the cases were malignant, and because of that, you have to be realistic with the patient. The ERCP is not to cure them, but to relieve their jaundice and then prepare them for other treatment. Consumable could be challenging. Most of the vendors do not have outlets in Nigeria, but because of the exchange rates, those consumables are very expensive. So we are trying to work with the, we started with donation. We are engaging the vendors through the institution, and we are trying to encourage competition among them. Now, one major thing that we learned is that we need not just a team, we need a system that is working. Some of the patients that have failed ERCP will have benefited from a rendezvous technique. An interventional radiologist passes a guide wire from above, and you are able to put a stent. But we never thought of that, and we are trying to work on that. That you need to have a functional interventional radiology unit along with you. Try and develop that as you are developing your ERCP skill. Of course, you need a surgical capacity, because there are some patients that will have complications that need surgery, and this has to be attended to. So if you're a gastroenterologist, easier for me to do because I'm a surgeon. I'm the same person doing the ERCP, and if the patient needs a failed procedure, I can take them in for a bypass. Also need to know, you need to know that ERCP is an invasive procedure, so I will not do ERCP for somebody with an ambiguous indication. I will rather image them. Apprenticeship model that we have established may be the best way to develop ERCP and EUS skill in Nigeria. Prior training in a well-established center is necessary, before starting the apprenticeship, and there are obvious willing help that you can take advantage of if you are interested in doing this. There's need to bring the administrators on board before we start, because we start with nothing and we are almost having virtually everything. So in conclusion, ERCP is possible in our setting. We've been able to do it. I believe anybody, any well or advanced endoscopy center in Africa that doesn't have ERCP can also do the same thing. The multidisciplinary nature of ERCP service delivery places an incentive on training within the home institution, because you can bring somebody down that will talk to the anesthesiologist, to your nurses and all that. It will be expensive to carry everybody to a center and bring them back. Some, as we know, may not even come back. So that's all that I have. I want to especially thank Akui for what she has done and others that joined in. And I want to thank Dr. Thompson for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's quite a tour de force to get to where you've got to. And again, I take my hat off to you. Akui is just going to round up by what's planned for going forward, because as you can see, it's very much a work in progress. And again, you can see the volume of pathology, I'm sure, will rise exponentially. And unfortunately, we obviously don't know what the denominator of all the jaundiced patients is, because this really is the tip of the iceberg. I don't think we should lose sight of that. Akui, please go ahead.
Thank you. So just to kind of carry on, I'll just take a few minutes and explain the planning. So one of the things we had discussed, Professor Alatisha and I had discussed from the very beginning, is how do we make this a program that grows outside of IFE? How do we make this something for the entire country of Nigeria? And then how do we eventually make this for the continent? And so this was halted obviously with COVID, but we're now back on track to meeting the goal we had set forth. So our initial goal was to develop a one-year ERCP training program. Initial focus will be in Nigeria. Our long-term goal is EUS and ERCP, and also getting trainees from other countries who could come to IFE as a training site and the other training sites that we develop in Nigeria and train and then return to their home countries. And so we chose centers. We've discussed choosing individuals coming from 4 centers, and these are the centers that you can see on the screen. So Lagos, Ekiti, Oyo, and Kano. And this is based on what's currently in existence to develop those centers. And so what we'll have is quarterly formal hands-on training sessions, so the bolus methods, and they'll be supervised by an experienced interventional gastroenterologist with continuous individualized hands-on and didactic. So basically, we'll have someone come in from someone trained from outside. They'll come in, they'll work with the trainees. Once those trainers leave, the training will still continue with Professor Alatisha, wherein he'll be able to provide the hands-on training for individuals in country. Our goal, as I said, is 4 to 5 centers, such that after a certain period of time, which would be that 1 year time, trainers will be able to go to the other centers to provide them support, and we'll continue to grow from there. And our selection criteria is going to be determined by the program lead, so Professor Alatisha and I. And the things we have discussed is what we mentioned earlier. Do they have support? In other words, it's not training an individual just so they say they've been trained, but do they have administrative support? Do they have the equipment? And it is mandatory that they come with a nurse. So we're not training doctors alone, as we have both emphasized, this is teamwork. So we need to train the nurses as well as we're training the doctors. And in terms of the faculty, so far, these are the faculty members. We've got Dr. Rahul Panala from Mayo Clinic, Professor Sandy Thompson, who's moderating our session, Dr. Ekinadisa Burimi, who actually came in 2019, Professor Kulinda Dua, who was also there in 2019, where we're kickstarting the program, and Dr. Moman Gabber, who I trained with at the BI. So these are the current trainers. However, we're obviously open to getting more trainers, and we'll kind of go from there. So just to summarize everything, so time management is extremely important, setting your time and long-term continuity planning. And so in terms of time management, one of the things he mentioned, so Professor Alatisha and I actually communicate quite a bit. Usually it's on WhatsApp or email. So before I set a time, I always ask him what works for him, because he has other programs that he's running. So when he gives me dates that work for him, then I could check to see if that works for me as well. So it's not me saying this is when I'm coming, but it's me asking what works best for you. And then we kind of work around that. And then personal obligations, keeping that in mind, that's also integral to setting up these programs. And then at the key and core of everything for us, patient comfort, dignity, and safety. It's extremely important that we maintain the comfort and dignity of our patients. And then we always emphasize understanding your limits. So just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And he gave some of those examples in terms of complications. So you have to understand what complications can happen and how do you handle those complications. Establishing a team, it's team approach, doctors, nurses, technicians, biomedical engineers, maintaining communication challenges, budget, supplies, engaging medical device companies. I remember I introduced them to the Boston Scientific Group, and from there things have grown. But one of the things that he mentioned, which is extremely important, is we're able to show that the service is needed. And what we're hoping now is that these device companies would now look and see this as a potential site for them to provide their accessories. And not only Boston Scientific, but whether it's Cook or it's Olympus, Carl Stotz, Pentax, Fuji, you name it. We want them to recognize that this is a center. And then philanthropy is also another way, hoping that we can have philanthropists who would make donations for this program to grow. As you can see, we had an initial meeting in 2017. Our first ERCP there was us as a team, was in 2018. 2019, we expanded the faculty, but held off due to COVID. 2020, it was sustainable. And that was the proof that this can work. I wasn't traveling, but the team was determined. They were persistent. They made it happen, and it carries on. In 2021, 2022, we're now going to move forward, which is expanding the ERCP program, eventually adding EOS so we can train individuals within Nigeria, but then also opening this up to the entire African continent and getting other trainers from different parts of the continent. I'd like to conclude by thanking my division that's giving me the time to do this, the Center for Global Health that's supporting me, and the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at the Massachusetts General Hospital. I will end there. Thank you so much for this invitation.
Thanks very much, Akwi. I see there are one or two questions here in the chat box. Again, a sterling effort. We're just talking about the Nigerian facility. Is it a public or a private center? Who pays for the procedures? And are the accessories used outdated or new? It sounds very much as though they're outdated stock, but I can't confirm that. So Prof. Alatis, if you could speak to exactly what the situation is in your hospital. As far as I understand, it's a state institution.
Yeah, it's actually a government institution, and the situation in Nigeria is that everybody pays for his treatment. So patient pay for the treatment. So what we do is that though the patient pay for the consumables and all that, we were still able to subsidize whatever they are paying. If the patient has to pay for what we are using for the procedure, actually the price will be exorbitantly high. But we are trying to work with the vendors, and since this is not a profit-making process, it's actually to make this skill set available, and also to also be able to establish a training center. So we were able to moderate the fee in such a way that patient that can afford it will be able to afford it. And it's less than probably less than what they will use to travel to take a flight down, let alone even a return flight. So what we are charging is not even up to their flight ticket for those that are traveling, which is like something that is attractive to many people that have been traveling. And as we build the skill, a lot of people are becoming confident to refer their patient to us.
Yes. Again, can I ask in that respect? I understand that you've made the model work in your own environment, but are there as many individuals as you everywhere else, and as many Akwis to make it work on a bigger scale? Because it does seem the obstacles are still very large. I'm not trying to discourage.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with you. And that was why I said that whosoever is interested in pioneering ERCP in this part of the world should be somebody that is resilient. And that's why probably that's some of the things that surgeons are wired with. We've been made to deal with so many people in our training. Before you can do a surgery, you have to deal with anesthesiologists, you have to deal with nurses, you have to deal with, get all the necessary consumables. I think that works very well for me as a surgeon, and that helps because some of my physician colleagues, when they talk about ERCP, they take it for granted that there's a lot of things to put in place, even because a patient that is coming with a bilirubin of 600 micromole with INR of 3.0 or 4.0. The patient I did on Monday or Tuesday, the INR was 11 at presentation. So it's beyond just doing the procedure. You have to prepare the patient and get all that. So everything has to be put on the table before you can get, but it is doable. If we can do it, I believe anybody can do it.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that statement. I want to put emphasis on the people on the ground. So I think it's, from my perspective, the determination from Professor Letitia in terms of, like you said, making sure we have this, we have that, and getting it done. I think that's absolutely critical. So I 100%, I think anyone can do it. And I think it's just a partnership, it's a collaboration. And so just like how we've started our center, one thing is we're open, right? So our goal is to expand. And so the other question would then be, how can we within the continent, like for example, Sandy, you're going to be coming to Nigeria. So how can we get more people like Sandy to travel to Nigeria? How can we get more people? How do we develop a network and say, you know what, you're going to Nigeria this week, you're going to Ethiopia next week, you're going to whatever it is. So if we can get that network formed, wherein we're developing the centers, then you'll end up having less people who are traveling and more people who are trained within their own countries. And you're absolutely right. Maybe eventually the people who are paying to go to UK or paying to go to India would now be able to put that money back within the countries. It's going to take time. And I think it's a great question that you asked. It's not all that, it's not all that peachy. There's definitely challenges, but I think working as a team, I think, it's taken us, 3 or 4 years? Even COVID didn't knock us down. We're still here and we're ready to go next year. Yes.
So I'm not looking for too many jobs, but one of the things is I think there are a lot of, I think there should be a thrust to involve the people who are, well, not quite as old as me, but who are approaching retirement, who don't have the same clinical load, clinical commitment as you guys. And that maybe you should do that through the gastroenterology organizations, WGO, AGA, European, and see how many, because there are quite a few. Jerry Way goes to Uganda. There's quite a few still who are practicing very well. But again, this poses other issues regarding how healthy you are when you get to our age and what happens to you if you actually get sick when you're on one of these trips. So I do think that's something you should explore, how you can make use of septuagenarians maybe. I wouldn't go as far as the octogenarians. I don't know if there's any questions from anybody else. If anybody would like to put their hand. We don't want to dominate this, and I think we do have to wrap up in just a minute.
As they were looking at that question, what we do is that when you arrive in Nigeria, we make sure that we pampered you and protect you from being bitten by mosquito and ensure that we deliver you back to the airport safe and sound. Yes. And that's what we've done for Akui. We've done that to all my friends. And I believe anybody that wants to do this, you are inviting somebody from abroad to come and help you. It is your responsibility to ensure that guy return back in good health. You need to watch out the diet, what you are feeding the guy with, and all that. I think we try to manage Akui very well, and I've also managed Peter. Both of them are very sensitive when it comes to diets, but we've been successful in managing them. And I think we can do it for octogenarian like you if you decide to come to Nigeria.
I'm soon to be a septuagenarian, but not quite an octogenarian yet.
Okay.
I know I look old, but never mind. Anyway, enough of this. I think really, it just remains for me to thank the two of you for putting your enthusiasm to the audience, for sure, and to show that where there's a will, there's a way, and that's definitely true. And what little small part I can play in helping with some of these endeavors, it will only be a pleasure to try. From my point of view, I have to say to the audience as well, thank you. And to again, thank our hosts, Echo India especially, who put up with the vagaries that we put forward. And please fill in all the forms that come on the chat site. This is recorded, so it is available to any of those of you who want to view it again. And I will certainly be sending it to a couple of colleagues of mine who've also been participating in other echoes, including Peter Cotton, who was recently on the Ethiopian echo. And thanks again to the girls in the background, Cheryl and Karen. And we have lots of sponsors who make the platform work and help us to do things and get in touch with people. So that's Takeda, Asino, Amgen, Equity, Aspen, and Adcock Ingram. And next week, don't forget, is IBD G-Echo, and it looks like it's David Epstein, who's the doyen of the IBD database, and he will be sharing some cases from sub-Saharan Africa, which have been problematic. So I hope you'll join in next week. All the best for the festive season and good hunting at ERCP. Bye-bye.